Letters from Heaven, a Family Feud story. The studio lights blazed with their usual warmth, casting golden rays across the iconic Family Feud set like a halo of possibility. Every bulb had been carefully positioned to create that perfect television magic, bright enough to energize, warm enough to comfort. Steve Harvey adjusted his navy blue suit jacket, the fabric crisp and perfectly tailored, and flashed that million-dollar smile that had made him America's favorite game show host for over a decade. Behind him, the familiar blue and gold Family Feud logo gleamed against its backdrop, a symbol that had become synonymous with family fun, unexpected answers, and those precious moments when laughter brought people together. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their energy filling every corner of the Atlanta studio like electricity waiting to arc. These weren't just spectators. They were participants in something larger than entertainment. They were witnesses to the American family experience in all its beautiful, messy, complicated glory. The warm-up comedian had already worked the crowd into a state of joyful expectation. Families in the audience held homemade signs supporting their favorites. Children clutched Family Feud merchandise, and grandparents sat with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for Christmas morning. This was more than a television taping. It was a celebration of what made families tick, what made them laugh, what made them human. "Welcome back to Family Feud," Steve announced, his voice booming with practiced enthusiasm. "We've got an incredible show for you today. Playing for $20,000, we have the Martinez family from Phoenix, Arizona, taking on the Williams family from Charlotte, North Carolina." The Martinez family stood proudly at their podium, 3 generations of strong women, led by 68-year-old Rosa Martinez, a retired teacher, whose silver hair caught the stage lights like a crown of wisdom earned through decades of shaping young minds. Her hands, weathered from years of writing on chalkboards and grading papers late into the night, rested on the podium with quiet dignity. Beside her stood her daughter Carmen, 45, a nurse practitioner, whose scrubs had been traded for her best church dress for this special day. Carmen's eyes sparkled with the same intelligence that had earned her a master's degree, while working full-time and raising twins as a single mother. Those twins, Sophia and Isabella, both 22 and recent college graduates, flanked their family with the confidence of young women who had been raised to believe they could conquer the world. Sophia, the elder by 12 minutes, had just completed her degree in social work, while Isabella had followed her grandmother's footsteps into education, earning her teaching certificate. They wore matching silver necklaces, gifts from Rosa for their graduation, and the kind of easy smiles that spoke of a family where love was expressed freely and often. Their journey to this moment had been anything but easy. Rosa had come to America as a young bride, speaking only Spanish, carrying dreams as big as her suitcase was small. She had worked as a housekeeper while learning English at night, eventually earning her teaching degree at the age of 30. Carmen had inherited her mother's determination, putting herself through nursing school, while Rosa watched the twins, creating a cycle of support that had lifted the entire family. The 18-hour drive from Phoenix had been filled with laughter, old stories, and the kind of comfortable banter that only came from women who had weathered life's storms together. At the opposing podium, the Williams family presented an equally impressive lineup, each member carrying their own story of resilience and hope. Robert Williams, 52, stood with the straight-backed posture of a man who had spent 30 years in construction, building other people's dreams while carefully crafting his own family's foundation. His hands, calloused from years of honest work, betrayed a gentleness that his teenage sons Marcus and Devon knew well. These were the same hands that had taught them to throw a baseball, helped with homework when their mother worked late shifts, and had never been raised in anger despite the pressures of keeping a family afloat on a working man's wages. Marcus, 17, was the scholar of the family, his academic achievements a source of quiet pride for parents who had never had the opportunity for higher education themselves. His college applications were already submitted, each one representing dreams that stretched far beyond what his parents had dared to imagine for themselves. Devon, 15, was the athlete, his basketball trophies at home telling the story of discipline, teamwork, and the kind of natural talent that college scouts were already beginning to notice. Robert's sister Patricia, 48, completed their team alongside her daughter Jasmine, 19. Patricia's story was one of second chances and hard-won wisdom. A single mother who had started her own house-cleaning business after her divorce. She had built something from nothing, teaching her daughter that independence wasn't just an ideal but a survival skill. Jasmine, a sophomore at the local community college, balanced her studies with helping her mother's business, understanding that education was both a privilege and a responsibility. The Williams family's first airplane ride had been an adventure in itself. They had saved for months to make this trip possible, each family member contributing what they could. Robert had worked overtime. Patricia had taken on extra clients, and the boys had foregone their usual summer activities to help with fundraising. This wasn't just a game show appearance. It was a family vacation, a bonding experience, and a chance to show the world what the Williams family was made of. Steve worked his magic during the opening introductions, drawing laughter from both families with his signature humor that somehow managed to be both spontaneous and perfectly timed. He had perfected the art of making each family feel like they were the only people in the room, despite the cameras, the studio lights, and the audience of 300. "Now, Rosa," Steve had said during introductions, his voice carrying that warm familiarity that made strangers feel like old friends. "What's the secret to raising such beautiful, accomplished granddaughters?" Rosa's answer had brought down the house. "I told them education is like underwear. You might not see it, but you feel naked without it." The Martinez family had driven 18 hours in Rosa's old Buick, the same car that had taken Carmen to noting school, the twins to their first day of college, and 3 generations of women to countless family gatherings over the years. The Buick's trunk was filled with snacks Rosa had prepared, homemade tamales, fresh tortillas, and enough food to feed both families twice over. "You never know when people might be hungry," she had explained to the production assistants, offering them plates before they'd even finished setting up. Meanwhile, the Williams family had taken their first airplane ride ever, treating it like the adventure it was. Robert had documented everything with his phone. The takeoff, the clouds, his sons' faces pressed against the windows. For a man who had built his life around stability and routine, this trip represented something extraordinary. Proof that dreams, when shared by a family, had a way of taking flight. These were the kinds of stories that made Family Feud more than just a game show. They were windows into the heart of America. Snapshots of families who understood that love was measured not in grand gestures, but in daily sacrifices, shared dreams, and the willingness to drive 18 hours or fly for the first time just to spend time together on national television. The first few rounds progressed with the typical blend of strategy, luck, and those unexpected moments that made Family Feud appointment television for millions of viewers. Steve cracked jokes about the Martinez family's answers to "name something you might find in your grandmother's purse." When Sophia had confidently answered "holy water," the studio had erupted in appreciation. It wasn't just that the answer earned the number 3 spot on the board. It was the way Sophia had delivered it with complete sincerity, the way Rosa had nodded in proud approval, and the way Steve had doubled over in delighted laughter. "Holy water," Steve had repeated, wiping tears from his eyes. "You know what? That's exactly what my grandmother would have said. Y'all are good." The Williams family had dominated their turn with their response to "name something people do when they're nervous." Marcus's answer of "talk to themselves" had not only hit the number 1 spot, but had prompted Steve to launch into an impromptu story about his own pre-show rituals, creating one of those unscripted moments that reminded everyone why love television was still magic. The energy in the studio was electric, but comfortable, the kind of atmosphere that emerged when genuine personalities met professional excellence. The audience was fully invested, cheering not just for points, but for the families themselves. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about celebrating the beautiful complexity of family dynamics, the shared experiences that connected strangers, and the joy that emerged when people felt truly seen and appreciated. But during the 4th round, As the studio hummed with the comfortable rhythm of a show hitting its stride, everything changed in a way that no one, not the producers, not the audience, not even Steve Harvey himself, could have predicted. The category was Name Something You Wish You Could Tell Someone Who's No Longer With Us. It was meant to be a touching but manageable question, the kind that might generate answers like "I love you, thank you," or "I'm sorry." Rosa Martinez stepped forward to the podium, her weathered hands gripping the sides with a tremor that spoke of both age and sudden emotion. Steve noticed the change immediately. In 40 years of hosting, he'd developed an instinct for reading contestants, and something in Rosa's expression had shifted from game show excitement to something much deeper. "Mrs. Rosa," Steve said gently, his voice losing its performative edge. "You ready for this one?" Rosa nodded, but her eyes had become distant, as if she were seeing something beyond the studio lights, beyond the cameras, beyond the present moment entirely. "Name something you wish you could tell someone who's no longer with us," Steve repeated, though his delivery was slower now, more careful. Rosa's lips parted, but no sound came. The studio audience, sensing something profound was happening, fell quiet. Even the Williams family leaned forward from their podium, no longer thinking about competition. "Mama?" Carmen whispered from behind her, stepping slightly closer. Rosa looked down at her hands, then back up at Steve. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades. "That I found the letters," she said simply. Steve's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't a typical Family Feud answer. "The letters? The letters my husband wrote to our daughter before he died. The ones he never sent because," Rosa's voice broke, "because he thought she hated him." The studio fell completely silent. This was no longer about points or buzzers or survey responses. This was about something infinitely more important. Behind the scenes, the show's producers faced a decision that would define this moment. Keep rolling or cut to commercial. The head producer, watching from the control room, made a choice that honored the humanity of what was unfolding. The cameras kept rolling. Steve set down his cards and stepped closer to Rosa's podium. "Tell me about these letters, Mrs. Rosa." Rosa's daughter Carmen moved to stand beside her mother, tears already beginning to form in her eyes because she knew this story, had lived with its weight for years, had watched her mother carry the burden of a family fractured by pride and misunderstanding. "My husband Miguel died 5 years ago," Rosa began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, drawing power from the truth that had been locked away for too long. "Cancer, pancreatic cancer. 68 years old. And just like that, gone." She paused, gathering herself, looking out at the audience that had become silent witnesses to her pain. "Our daughter Elena, she lived in Chicago. She was angry with her father for things that happened when she was young. He worked too much, missed too many school plays, too many birthdays. She moved away at 18 and barely spoke to us for 20 years. The audience was completely absorbed now, leaning forward in their seats, understanding instinctively that they were no longer watching entertainment but witnessing something sacred, something real that transcended the boundaries between performer and audience. "Miguel, he was a good man," Rosa continued, her voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of memories. "But he was born in a different time, in a different world. His father never told him, 'I love you,' never hugged him, never showed affection. Miguel didn't know how to break that cycle. He loved Elena more than his own life, but he didn't know how to show it. Every time he tried to talk to her, it came out wrong. Every time he wanted to apologize, his pride got in the way." Carmen placed a protective hand on her mother's shoulder, remembering those painful family dinners where father and daughter sat at the same table, but might as well have been in different worlds, their love for each other obvious to everyone, except themselves. "When Miguel got sick," Rosa continued, her voice breaking slightly, "Elena came home. We hoped, maybe this would be their chance. But they couldn't. They could never find the words. Too much hurt, too much pride, too many years of silence. She stayed for 3 weeks while he was in the hospital. They would sit in the same room for hours, and neither one knew how to bridge that gap. She left the day after the funeral, and I thought that was it. I thought my family was broken forever. The silence in the studio was so complete that you could hear the air conditioning system humming. Steve Harvey stood transfixed, his own experience with complicated family relationships, allowing him to feel the depth of Rosa's pain. He thought of his own children, his own struggles to balance career and family, his own fears about whether he was doing enough, saying enough, being enough. "But you found letters?" Steve prompted gently, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the sacred space that Rosa's honesty had created. Rosa nodded, reaching into the small purse she'd carried onto the stage, the same purse that had held her teaching supplies for 30 years, her grandmother's rosary, and now these letters that would change everything. From it, she pulled out a bundle of envelopes tied with a faded blue ribbon, the kind of ribbon that Miguel had saved from every birthday and Christmas gift, too sentimental to throw away. The sight of them caused a visible reaction throughout the studio, gasps from the audience, sharp intakes of breath from both competing families, and a collective understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented in television history. 3 months ago, I was cleaning out Miguel's workshop, Rosa explained, her fingers trembling as she held the precious bundle. "You know how men are. They keep everything. Old tools, broken lawnmower parts, coffee cans full of screws and bolts." I was going to donate his tools to the high school shop class. Behind his tool cabinet, wedged between the wall and a box of old car parts, I found these 47 letters addressed to Elena, letters he wrote over the years but never sent. Carmen was crying openly now, her hand on her mother's shoulder, remembering the day they'd found the letters, how they'd sat in that dusty workshop, reading them, until the sun went down, discovering a side of Miguel they'd never known existed. "Why didn't he send them?" Steve asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew the answer, recognized the fear that kept so many people from saying what their hearts desperately wanted to express. "Because he was afraid," Rosa said simply. "Afraid she wouldn't read them. Afraid she'd throw them away. Afraid that putting his feelings on paper would make the rejection more real, more final. So he wrote them and kept them, like a diary of love that no one would ever see." Carmen was crying openly now, her hand on her mother's shoulder. The twins, Sophia and Isabella, had moved closer, forming a protective circle around their grandmother. "What did they say?" Steve asked, his own voice thick with emotion. Rosa carefully untied the ribbon, her fingers trembling slightly. She pulled out the top letter, its envelope yellowed with age. "This one is from when Elena was 16, and they had their biggest fight. She wanted to go to art school, and Miguel said it wasn't practical. She screamed at him that he didn't understand her dreams." She opened the letter with careful reverence and began to read. "My dear Elena, I know you think I don't support your art, but you're wrong. I've kept every drawing you've ever made hidden in my toolbox. I look at them when work gets hard and remember that I have a daughter who can create beauty from nothing. I say art isn't practical because I'm scared. I'm scared you'll struggle the way I did. But maybe struggling for something you love is better than succeeding at something that kills your spirit. I wish I was brave enough to tell you this. I wish I was brave enough to say, I'm sorry. Love, Papa." The silence that followed was profound. Several audience members were openly weeping. Even the camera operators, hardened professionals who'd seen thousands of tapings, found themselves wiping their eyes. Steve Harvey, the man who had built his career on quick wit and perfect timing, stood speechless for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Did Elena ever see this letter?" Rosa shook her head. "She died 2 years ago. Car accident. She never knew how her father really felt." The weight of that revelation hit the studio like a physical force. This wasn't just about a family reconciliation. It was about love unexpressed, words unspoken, and the devastating finality of missed opportunities. But Rosa wasn't finished. She looked directly at Steve, then at the cameras, then at her daughter Carmen. "But I have something else to tell you," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Elena had a daughter, my granddaughter Sarah. She's 25, and she's been just as angry with us as Elena was with her father. She thinks we abandoned her mother, that we didn't care enough to fix things." Carmen stepped forward, understanding where her mother was heading. "Sarah's watching today," she said to Steve. "We told her we were going to be on the show, and she said she'd watch just to see us make fools of ourselves." Rosa held up the bundle of letters again. "Sarah, if you're watching this, these letters aren't just from your grandfather to your mother. Some of them are about you, about how proud he was when you were born, how he wished he could have been part of your life, how he dreamed of teaching you to paint like your mother." She pulled out another letter, this one with a different date. This one he wrote, "The day you were born. Today I became a grandfather to a little girl I may never hold. If I could send her one message, it would be this. You come from a long line of strong women and men who love deeply, but struggle to show it. Don't let our mistakes keep you from knowing how wanted you are, how loved you are, how proud we are of the woman you'll become." The emotional impact was overwhelming. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of shows and thought he'd seen everything, found himself struggling to maintain composure. "Mrs. Rosa," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "what do you want Sarah to do?" Rosa looked directly into the camera, speaking as if her granddaughter were standing right in front of her. "Sarah, Misha, your grandfather loved you before he ever met you. Your mother loved you more than her own life. And I have been waiting 25 years to hold you again, to tell you stories about your mama when she was little, to show you the drawings she made that your grandfather treasured." She held up the letters one more time. "These letters, they're yours now. They're your inheritance. They're proof that love doesn't die with the person, and that families can heal even across time, even across death." Steve Harvey made a decision that would be talked about for years. He stepped away from his hosting position entirely, walked over to the Williams family podium, and addressed them directly. "Williams family, I'm about to ask you something, and I need you to answer from your hearts, not as competitors. Would you mind if we stopped this game right here and did something more important?" Robert Williams, the family patriarch, didn't hesitate. "Mr. Steve, you do whatever this family needs. Some things are bigger than winning." Steve nodded his appreciation, then turned to address the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do something that's never been done on Family Feud. We're going to use the power of television for something more important than entertainment." He looked directly into the main camera. "Sarah, if you're watching this, your grandmother is here, holding letters from a grandfather who loved you from the moment you were born. These letters are waiting for you. But more than that, a family is waiting for you." Rosa stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Sarah, come home. Let us love you the way we should have loved your mother. Let us share these stories, these letters, this family that belongs to you." The studio audience rose to their feet in spontaneous applause, but it wasn't the typical game show cheering. It was something deeper, recognition of a moment that transcended entertainment and touched the fundamental human need for connection and healing. Steve Harvey, still standing in the center of the stage, made one final gesture that would cement this moment in television history. He removed his suit jacket, the same navy blue jacket he'd worn for every taping that season, and walked over to Rosa. "Mrs. Rosa," he said, "this jacket has been with me through hundreds of shows, thousands of families, and countless moments of joy and surprise. But today, it witnessed something more important than all of that combined. I want you to have it, and I want you to give it to Sarah when she comes home." Rosa accepted the jacket with trembling hands, holding it like the precious gift it represented. "But that's not all," Steve continued. "My team is going to help get you and Sarah Nenekut. We're going to make sure those letters get to her, and we're going to help your family heal." As if orchestrated by fate itself, One of the production assistants rushed onto the stage with a phone. "Mr. Harvey," she called out, "we have Sarah on the line. She's been watching, and she wants to talk to her grandmother." The studio fell silent as Rosa took the phone with shaking hands. The conversation that followed was private, conducted in whisper and tears, but the emotions on Rosa's face told the entire story. When she finally handed the phone back, she was sobbing with joy. "She's coming home," Rosa announced to the studio. "She's driving here tonight. She wants to read the letters with me." The celebration that followed was unlike anything in game show history. Both families left their podiums to embrace Rosa and her family. The audience gave a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Even the crew members stepped out from behind their equipment to participate in this moment of pure human connection. Steve Harvey, standing in his white dress shirt without his suit jacket for the first time in his hosting career, addressed the cameras one final time. "You know, we ask a lot of survey questions on this show. We talk about what's popular, what's common, what most people think. But today, Mrs. Rosa and her family reminded us of something that doesn't need a survey to prove. Love always finds a way. Sometimes it comes in letters that are found decades later. Sometimes it comes through a granddaughter watching a game show. Sometimes it comes when we least expect it and need it most." He looked at Rosa, still clutching his jacket and the bundle of letters. These letters weren't just messages from a father to his daughter. They were messages from love itself, waiting for the right moment to complete their journey. The episode that aired 6 months later became the most watched Family Feud in the show's history, drawing over 15 million viewers and sparking thousands of conversations in living rooms across America. But more importantly, it sparked a national movement about family healing, unexpressed love, and the power of words to bridge even the deepest wounds. The show's social media accounts were flooded with stories from viewers who had been inspired to reach out to estranged family members, to write their own letters, to have conversations that had been postponed for too long. Dr. Rosa Martinez, as she now called herself after legally taking back her grandfather's surname, became a symbol of hope for families everywhere. The young woman who had driven through the night from Chicago to Atlanta, who had arrived at the studio just as the taping concluded, who had fallen into her grandmother's arms while clutching Steve Harvey's jacket, she became living proof that it's never too late for love to find its way home. Rosa and Sarah did reunite that night, reading Miguel's letters together until sunrise in Rosa's hotel room. They ordered room service for breakfast and stayed in their pajamas, discovering each other through the words of a man who had loved them both from a distance. The workshop where the letters were found became a place of pilgrimage for them, transformed from a storage space into a mirror where they would sit together every Sunday, sharing stories of Elena, of Miguel, and of the love that had always existed but had struggled to find its voice. The 47 letters revealed a man who had been deeply emotional but culturally constrained, a father who had loved fierce but hadn't known how to express it without feeling vulnerable. Through his words, Elena lived again for Sarah, not as the angry, distant mother she remembered, but as a young woman with dreams, fears, and a father who had secretly supported her all along. One letter, written when Elena was 25, the same age Sarah was now, revealed Miguel's regret about not attending her art school graduation, his pride in her first gallery showing, which he'd attended secretly, standing in the back, and his desperate wish to tell her that her success meant more to him than any conventional career ever could. Steve's jacket became a family heirloom, carefully preserved and worn only on special occasions. Sarah wore it at her wedding 2 years later, walking down the aisle with both Rosa and Carmen beside her. She wore it when she defended her doctoral thesis in art therapy, a field she'd chosen after reading her grandfather's letters about the healing power of creativity. Rosa's great-grandchildren would wear it to their graduations, each generation understanding that they were carrying forward not just a piece of clothing, but a symbol of love's persistence, family's resilience, and the courage it takes to open your heart even when you're afraid. But more than a garment, the jacket represented something larger. The moment when a game show became a vehicle for healing, when entertainment became ministry, and when a family's private pain was transformed into a public reminder of love's enduring power. Steve Harvey had given away hundreds of prizes over his career, but nothing had ever meant more than giving away that jacket, because he understood that some gifts aren't about the giver's generosity, but about the recipient's need to be seen, to be valued, to be reminded that they matter. The Family Feud producers, recognizing the episode's impact, established the Miguel's Letters Scholarship Fund, providing educational grants for young people who had overcome family estrangement. They partnered with family therapy organizations to create resources for reconciliation, understanding that Rosa's story was just one of millions waiting to be told. Millions of families separated by pride, misunderstanding, and the simple human inability to say, "I love you" when it matters most. In his memoir, published 3 years later and dedicated to Rosa Martinez and all the grandmothers who keep families together, Steve Harvey wrote about that day with the kind of honesty that had made him beloved, not just as an entertainer but as a truth-teller. In 40 years of television, I've learned that the most powerful moments happen not when we follow the script, but when we throw it away and follow our hearts. Mrs. Rosa and her family taught me that some stories are too important to be contained by format, too meaningful to be reduced to entertainment, too sacred to be anything less than exactly what they are. Proof that love never dies, it just waits for the right moment to come home. He continued, "I've given away cars, vacations, money and prizes worth millions of dollars. But the most valuable thing I ever gave away was a suit jacket to a grandmother, who reminded me that the real prize isn't what you win, it's what you're willing to sacrifice for the people you love." Miguel Martinez never sent those letters, but his love found a way. It always does. The Martinez family never did finish their Family Feud game that day. The scoreboard showed them trailing by 30 points when Rosa made her revelation, but nobody in that studio cared about the score anymore. They won something infinitely more valuable than money: the return of a lost granddaughter, the healing of a broken family, and the knowledge that sometimes the most important messages come not from the living, but from the love that survives long after we're gone. Sarah kept all 47 of her grandfather's letters, organizing them chronologically, and having them professionally preserved. She framed just one, the very first one he'd written when she was born, on hospital letterhead, from the day Elena had given birth. It hangs in her living room now, next to a photo of 4 generations of women: Rosa, Elena, Carmen, and herself, taken at Elena's funeral but cropped to show only their joined hands. Finally together, finally healed, finally home. The letter reads simply, "Today I became a grandfather to a little girl I may never hold. Elena won't let me near the hospital, and maybe she's right to be angry. But I want this little one to know something. Even if I never get the chance to tell her myself, she comes from people who love big and mess up bigger, who work hard and dream harder, who sometimes say the wrong thing but never stop trying to do the right thing. If she ever reads this, I want her to know that her grandfather loved her before he knew her name, before he saw her face, before he knew if she'd have her mama's eyes or her daddy's smile. Love doesn't need permission. Love doesn't need proximity. Love just is. And baby girl, you are loved." Rosa had that letter enlarged and framed for Sarah's new apartment, along with a photo of Miguel in his workshop, surrounded by the tools he'd used to build a life for his family, and the letters he'd used to build a bridge across time. Because sometimes love does find a way. Sometimes it comes wrapped in old letters tied with blue ribbon. Sometimes it comes through a game show host's jacket. Sometimes it comes through a grandmother's courage to speak truth on national television. And sometimes it comes exactly when a family is brave enough to stop playing games and start telling the truth. The legacy of that day extends far beyond one family's reunion. It reminds us that in a world increasingly divided by technology, politics, and distance, the fundamental human need for connection remains unchanged. It teaches us that pride is expensive, and forgiveness is free, that love doesn't have an expiration date, and that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is admit we need each other. That's not entertainment, that's legacy. That's the reminder that beneath all our differences, all our mistakes, all our stubborn pride, we are families trying to find our way back to each other. And sometimes, when we least expect it, love finds a way to light the path home.